Good greetings from Wawiatanong, where the river bends, otherwise known as Detroit, Michigan, USA, home of the Anishinaabe, Wyandot Huron, Fox, Miami, and So. Greetings also from my home province of Pampanga, Philippines, traditional homeland of the Aita peoples. Given the little time I have, let me just jump right into the subject assigned to me. So let me start. We are here because you were there. This is how scholars Ruth Frankenberg and Latamani long ago summarized the flow of more recent geographic migrations globally. They follow centuries-old colonial routes. Whether we're talking of Filipinos migrating to the US, peoples of Malaysia and Indonesia migrating to the Netherlands, Jamaicans and South Indians to Britain, Algerians to France, etc. We are here because you were there marks an untamable consequence of the history of conquest and plunder and will galvanize deep inquiries in what follows about the colonial imaginaries that have leveraged a 5,000-year-old thrust of nation states to invade elsewheres for laborers, goods, and land. But the assertion will also mark a boundary in history before which our species did something else in its wanderings when it traveled lightly on new terrain, asking permission to enter, giving offering and eloquence to already existing occupants, both human and non-human, and generally comported itself with keen awareness of the need to respect symbiosis and reciprocity as the hallmarks for sustainable dwelling over time in any given bioregion. In the lingerie of history, colonialism is revealed as dysfunctional for our own species as for any other. Ecological health over 500,000,000 years across an entire planet testifies to a constant evolutionary thrust towards biodiversity as the sustaining condition for life, whose watchword might be rendered simply, we are here because you are here. Any analysis of migration must needs pay homage to this largest frame of the discussion. When and how has nomadism served the planet's obviously mysterious concern to conserve life writ large? And when and how has that mobility been inverted into destruction? The writing here offers a basic outline of the question. But most immediately, we are here because you were there also serves as the mantra for my own personal wayfaring for more than half a century. And it is here, within personal itinerary and witness, that any integral accounting must begin. All scientific rigor to the good, our credibility begins with our bodies as they have moved through particular histories in particular places. My own was birthed out of an ancestry of lowland dwelling and farming Malay predecessors, whose migration from the Asian mainland to the island of Luzon, Philippines, beginning some 2 millennia before I showed up at least some level of colonizing displacement of the archipelago's earlier nomadic hunting and gathering inhabitants, who were thereby generally pushed out of riverine habitats and up mountain slopes. That history of displacement is a deep part of my own story, but one I am only lately recovering, as it did not warrant any sustained attention in my early education. What did demand attention and imposed itself as my first encounter with colonial power in everyday form was a demand by the US Peace Corps volunteer teachers in my home province, missionizing Christian Protestant hubris and American civilizational supremacy, that all of their darker skinned young charges, such as myself, desist from mother tongue speaking and learn the colonial language. In classroom and on playground alike, any forgetful recourse to Kapampangan instead of English meant censure and a 5 centavo fine. This disciplinary invasion of bodily integrity, violating the sonic habits and loves of my native tongue, began as a silent and silencing pedagogy of the most immediate modern meaning of migration as conquest and coercion. We speak English because you refused Kapampangan. My tongue was forced to move elsewhere long before the rest of me, and in a sense, the rest is history. There's not time in a talk like this to do more than hint, but my itinerary, like so many other Filipinos, was pushed west by US colonial retooling of the island economy, such that after World War II, increasing numbers of us have had to follow the invasion route upstream into the belly of the beast, whence our livelihood and resources were pirated. Another version of the We Are Here litany is we are here because our stuff is here. If not altogether literally, then certainly in digitized monetary tabulation, banking, all of the benefit accruing in the metropolitan center at the expense of the colonial periphery. I too, by incidents painful and imported, was forced to flee the homeland and begin life anew as an exile in Babylon. And that now quarter century history of living out of place is itself a litany of adversity and its overcoming that would take more than a lifetime to narrate with any degree of adequacy. Suffice it here to note that the civilizational hubris demanding English speaking as priority in my childhood had likewise inculcated Christianity as supremacy. The history of colonial missionizing in the Philippines, as everywhere else, had long cast all of our earth honoring tribal peoples as unsaved idolators destined for hell, and it brooked no alternative. Those it could not convert, it disappeared as subhuman and even dangerous. And it would take me decades to undo the epistemic violence of this supremacist missionizing that had turned a worthy story into a murderous sword and spirit killing pedagogy. I have since learned that much of the immiseration of peoples and places imposed by Western civilization's march of progress around the globe has effectively secularized and perpetuated what began as a logic of Christian supremacy. Indeed, in the most radical sense possible, the latter initiated the most comprehensive project of theft in history, underwriting the conquest and colonization of indigenous lands around the globe by way of the now infamous doctrine of Christian discovery. This latter series of papal bulls, issued beginning in the mid 15th century and later embraced in toto by Protestant authorities, conjured Christian identity as bearing an unassailable and sovereign right to claim land anywhere as property and heritage, and has subsequently been adopted across the colonial theater. Needless to say, much of modern migratory upheaval finds its roots just there. As an international scholar of color, I have likewise had to battle white supremacy in its most latent and damnable expressions as a supposedly progressive conviction of colorblind equanimity, and I've had to learn to stand up to oppression without becoming a mirror replica of the oppressor. But that is a story for another setting. In what little time remains, I want to steer clear away from personal narration to sketch what I judge to be my primary contribution to this discussion, and that is the framing of the question of migration across the large panorama of our time on the planet, asking continuously, for what do we aim when we seek to critique a development like global displacement? What is the source of whatever idea we conjure of a more just world. I do not offer simple solutions of either imagined goal or policy process facilitating the trek towards such. I'm primarily concerned to halt before what I judge to be the most apocalyptic throwdown of our time. Climate change asks today, what is a human? And does so with clock ticking insistence. Why are you here? Can you co-dwell with all else? Or must you be eliminated as too destructive to yourselves and the planet to be allowed a future? Which is to say, what is finally sustainable for our species? Aiming at anything less is but smoke, mere smoke and mirror, a cover for catastrophe to wax total and definitive. The issue is not merely securing human rights for migrants, hoping for a share of the corporate pie, but life rights for biodiverse ecologies everywhere. There is no future for any life form except in concert with a nearly unfathomable interdependence of uncountable numbers of other life forms. In other words, the giving up of all forms of human supremacy, whether civilizational, Christian, or white. Dealing with displacement from war, from privatization, from sea rise, from drought, from mining disasters and political repression and ethnic violence cannot merely ask about human survivability, but must now ask about the appropriate unit of human dwelling. What space is appropriate for human flourishing from generation to generation without the need to colonize other places and peoples? What would a community look like that did not need to outsource its acquisition of necessities? Said another way, what does a world look like wherein wandering, trade, migration are not coercive at any level, but voluntary, humane, sustainable, and conducive to vibrant communities and ecosystems across generations? The answer lies not in an apocalyptic projection of a rapturous salvation elsewhere, or a promised technological utopia, but in our past. Before civilization emerged under elite duress, coercing autonomous earth-dwelling and land-taught populations into their regimes of enslaved cultivators producing surplus, we live in migratory sustainability. Whether as hunter-gatherer, wandering within a circumscribed locality where the plants and animals were known for their habits and gifts, the waters and soils for their seasons, and the seasons for their cycles, or as nomadic pastoralists shepherding their herds across grasslands unsuitable to monocrop exploitation, awake to sky and land in all their undulating offerings of verdancy and nutrient, we live most of our time on the planet as a mobile species, ranging within a respected world, collaborating with non-human kin in well-tested practices, maintaining habitat and regenerating viability. The councils of sustainability came from the land itself. Movement required careful observations and reciprocating collaboration. Interspecies cooperation was not some magical childhood fantasy, but a necessity for life. Such is the lesson of COVID. Such is the lesson of our history. The task of this conference is indeed one of seeking insight and wisdom on a planetary emergency. A ceaseless displacement of growing masses of human beings, pride kicking and screaming from homelands decimated by colonial and now corporatized greed. In a sense, we may think of the triple whammy of colonialism, modernity, and Christian supremacy on the planet as one that has never not been about fleeing. A fleeing from our creatureliness, from our utter dependence upon soil and water, from other beings besides us, large and small, nay, a fleeing from mortality itself. But what if we let ourselves be claimed instead by an alternative witness to life, not running after some illusory dream of progress, but based rather on our actual deep history of having lived with beauty and mutuality in place, understanding our movements as reciprocal with and responsive to all our others as kin. Migration is part of the motion of life on the planet, but not when coerced out of the rhythmic ensemble of seasonal cycle or gradual epochal change. If there is to be a future, it is to this witness that we must turn. Thank you.